In this example, I will install WSUS through the server manager, but as you will see, whether you install it through the server manager or via the standalone install, the install is still the same. First of all, I will run server manager from the quick launch. And from the roles section, I'll select the option add roles from the right hand side. Once I am in the welcome screen, I'll select Windows Server Update Service from the components list. Once selected, Windows will prompt you for additional IIS components that are required. This is the advantage of installing WSUS through the server manager, is that the IIS components are automatically installed for you. If you are using WSUS standalone install, you will need to make sure that IIS components for WSUS are installed before you start installing WSUS. Once I press next, I will be taken into the configuration wizard for IIS. Once past the IIS welcome screen, you can see the components of IIS that will be installed. You can see that ASP.NET has already been pre-selected. Under Security Windows, Authentication has been selected as well. Under Performance, Dynamic Content Compression has also been selected. And lastly, under Management Tools, IIS 6 Management Capability, this has also been selected. You can see, however, that only IIS 6 Metabase Compatibility is selected out of the IIS 6 Management Compatibility components. If you plan on performing a manual install of WSUS, check your existing IIS setup, or when installing IIS, make sure that these 4 components are installed on a standalone installation. On the next screen, you will be taken into the WSUS setup. You will see that when I press next, there are no options to configure via Server Manager. Once I press install, the WSUS install will now start, and you will notice that under the progress bar, it says downloading. In order to install WSUS via the Server Manager, your server must have connection to the internet. Once WSUS has been downloaded from the internet, Server Manager will start installing the other components required for WSUS. In this case, IIS. The install may take a few minutes. I have accelerated time to the end so that we don't have to wait. You will notice that a new setup program has been launched. This setup program is the standalone setup for WSUS. The setup from here onwards is identical to the install performed by downloading and running the standalone setup from Microsoft. Once I accept the license and move on, you will notice that I get a message telling me that Microsoft Report Viewer 2008 Redistributable needs to be installed before I can get any reports. This can be installed later though, so I will skip this part and move on. On the next screen, you can decide where you want to install the updates that WSUS downloads. If you deselect this option, WSUS will not store any updates locally. When an update is requested by a client, WSUS will download the update directly from Windows Updates from another WSUS server. If you only want to use WSUS to determine what updates an end user can install, you can choose not to store any updates locally. In this case, I will store the updates in the default location on the C drive. But for best performance, you should consider storing the updates on a separate hard disk. On the next screen, you can determine where WSUS will install its database files. By default, you can use Windows Internal Database. On large enterprise environment, you may have a SQL Server. If I had a SQL Server installed on this computer, this option would not be grayed out, and I would be able to select a database. If your SQL database is on another server, you could select the last option to connect to this server. In this case, I will use Windows Internal Database and move on. On this screen, you can decide which website you want WSUS to use. If you have no other website on this server and are not planning on installing an additional website in the future, you should select the first option, use existing IIS default website. If you want to use the default website for something else, you should select the second option, and WSUS will not use the default website. In this case, I'm not planning on setting up any additional websites on this server, so I can select the default option. Once I confirm the install option on the next screen, I can move on and the install will start. The install may take 5 minutes or so to finish. I have accelerated time to the end of the install. You can see now that IIS and WSUS have been installed through what we term as the server manager. However, WSUS is still not configured. Once the install has completed, you will see this installation result window and back to server manager. We will now have to configure WSUS, so we're going to run the configuration wizard. You will notice I can close server manager without affecting the WSUS configuration wizard. Once I am past the WSUS welcome screen, I will get the option to decide if I want to take part in the Microsoft Improvement Program. Taking part in the program means that Microsoft will receive statistics on your network. Since this is a test network, I don't want to give Microsoft any misleading statistics, so I will switch this option off. On the next screen, you can decide where this WSUS server will get its updates from. By default, WSUS will receive its updates from Windows Update Server. If you have another WSUS server on the network, you can download updates from. You choose to select or enable SSL, traffic between the two servers will be encrypted. If I choose to obtain updates from another server, I will only be able to download updates from the server that updated the server. For example, just say you had a large company and a central IT department which decided which updates would be available to the rest of the company. Once these updates are approved, they could be downloaded to other servers, and the local administrator could decide which updates are installed on which computer. This is a good setup when you have two different IT departments working independently of each other but can only install approved updates. If both WSUS servers are being managed by the same IT department, you may want to select the option "This is a replica of the upstream." You will notice that when this option is selected, you can't configure any options on the server. What this means is that this server will have all the same settings as the parent server. This makes administration of multiple WSUS servers a lot easier. Since this server is a standalone server, I will get my updates from Microsoft and move on. On this screen, I can enter in a proxy server if I need one to access the internet. In this case, I have a direct connection, so I can leave it on the default and move on. Before you can start using the WSUS, you need to download a catalog of all the available updates. To do this, press the Start Connection or Start Connecting button and the catalog will be downloaded. The time required for this step depends on your internet connection and can take a while longer. I have accelerated time to the end of the download. Once complete, I can move on to the next screen and select which languages I want to download updates for. At the top, you can select to download updates for all languages. A word of caution with selecting this option though. Doing so will greatly increase the amount of space required on your local server required for installing updates, and also the amount of data traveling over your WAN link. In this case, I will only download English updates. I will get a warning here reminding me that any updates that you do not download on this server will also not be available to any downstream servers that you are to configure later on. A downstream server is simply another WSUS server that is set to retrieve its updates from the upstream server. On the next screen, I can decide which products that I want to download updates for. There is a huge range of Microsoft products, but WSUS does not allow third-party products to be added. You should choose products that you use in your organization, in this case Microsoft Office. You will need to take some time going through the list, making sure that you have selected all the products you use and have license. You could select them all, but this of course will use more bandwidth and hard disk space. Notice the operating system at the bottom. You should deselect the operating systems that you no longer use in your company. If you are planning on deploying new operating systems in the future, for example, Windows 8 or Windows 9, I would click on those right away. On the next screen, you can choose which types of updates you want to download. By default, critical updates, definition, and security updates are selected by default. Some companies don't like downloading new drivers as they may cause an existing operating system to start blue screening. I like to select things like feature packs and service packs. This can be very large though, and in my opinion save a lot of bandwidth when you deploy them to a big group of clients at a given time. Remember, however, that if you download service packs, the end user may experience a long delay when logging in one morning when the service pack installs. In some companies, I have seen them deselect service packs and choose to install them manually instead, so they can better manage when they are installed. In this case, I will select everything. Alright? Once you have decided which updates you want to install, you need to download them right away. On the next screen, you can decide if you want to perform manual synchronizations or set a schedule instead. In this case, I will leave it on a manual so I can decide when to perform the synchronization. On the next screen, I can decide if I want to perform the initial synchronization. The first synchronization takes the longest almost. So I will leave the setting on manual and perform the synchronization later on. That's it for WSUS. The initial install of WSUS and initial configuration are completed. Now that you have WSUS installed, you need to give some thought on how to